Good afternoon, Professor.
So another week, and um, the what is on my mind today is the fact that it's still possible for planes to disappear. How is that possible in the with the development of radar, wireless, digitization, and everything else that has happened over the last few decades to facilitate all sorts of data gathering and communication? How can it be possible for an aircraft to disappear?
Well, I think they have a pretty good idea of its location. Nobody turned the radar transponder off, so they're pretty, I think, clear as to where it is. And I'm pretty sure that if there is wreckage floating on the surface, that they'll find it. I think the more telling question will be is just right now, from looking at all the evidence, it certainly seems as if the most likely cause is some sort of onboard explosion. So how could explosives be placed on the plane in a flight that originated in Paris? That's a little concerning. I mean, if it was originating in Cairo, I could maybe take that a little easier. But Paris should be on high alert right now.
But it's not the first time that something like this has happened to Egypt Airlines.
No, no.
And the last plane that disappeared, which was Malaysian Airlines, just before it disappeared, it was recorded as having taken an abrupt turn away from its flight path, and the same was true with this one.
Well, the Malaysian plane took the abrupt turn, but then they, by human intervention apparently, disabled the transponder. So the on-ground trackers were unable to follow it, which was the biggest problem. I think with this plane, and I went on FlightAware.com, and it had pretty graphically, it had the route as well as the trajectory of the decline of the altitude. They know all that. They have that, and they probably are pretty close to pinpointing, relatively so, with glide pattern and things like that, and below 10,000 feet when I can't really track. They're pretty close to finding the area where it is. Of course, it's nighttime over there now, but I would bet that at some point tomorrow, if there is any wreckage floating on the surface, they'll have an idea as to where it is. Apparently, though, unfortunately, one item I read indicated that it went down in one of the deepest parts of the Mediterranean Sea.
Mediterranean.
So, but I think it's very interesting because ISIS, or the Islamic State, continues to threaten France. So much so that I read an article earlier today that the French intelligence minister indicated that there's likely to be an attack or attacks in crowd-based kind of events over the next several weeks. And maybe this is the beginning of the attack. I don't know. Nobody's claimed any credit yet, which is a little bit surprising.
Well, it's not only the ISIS threats to Paris, but ISIS is suffering in Iraq and Syria apparently, and yet and I suppose one shouldn't be surprised that in fact the terrorist type incidents seem to be increasing. So there's been several incidents in Baghdad in the last few days, and the warnings in Europe seem to continue to get more serious.
Perhaps you could explain a little bit as to the tension is too nice a word for it, too genteel a word, but describe a little bit about the conflict between ISIS in Iraq and the Sunni and the Shia in Iraq.
Well, there's been a lot of interesting discussion of this sort of thing on Gulf 2000, the listserv that is quite well known and patronized by most people who are specialists in the Middle East recently. And you know that there's a problem with the beginning of the Hajj pilgrimage this year, that whether Iranian pilgrims will be able to go to Saudi Arabia.
I did not know that.
So the sectarian division and conflict between Shia and Sunni is not quieting down. It seems if anything, it's getting worse. Although it doesn't seem necessarily that there's an effort to make it worse. It's just happening. And part of the problem may be the way it's reported in international media.
How so?
Because international media always focus on the Sunni version of things and talk about the Shi'i version of things as rebellion or threats.
Mm.
And that I'm sure has a feedback effect on what is actually going on out there. And there's been a lot of discussion of this in the last day or so, and documentation of it. It really is quite surprising, but of course it's fed by the fact that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has been understood as a staunch Western ally for over 50 years, and Iran has been understood as a staunch Western enemy for over 30 years.
Right, right.
The fact that many people feel that has changed really significantly in the last year doesn't seem to have influenced the way the reporting gets done yet.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a very interesting observation, because when you look at the historical enmity between the Shia and the Sunni, I mean, you have to scratch your head a little bit, wondering what the reaction is of people like Muqtar al-Sadr and the people in Tehran to having this huge expanse of Islamic State, Sunni-dominated Islamic State, basically set up in your own backyard right there. I mean, isn't there, one would think that they would be determined to rid themselves of this scourge.
Yes, I think another part of the problem is that we think of we tend to think of the world as being made up of nation states, and I'm not sure whether that's the way people out there think of things. Mm-hmm. Because until and there's been a lot of discussion of Sykes-Picot.
Yes,
recently.
I've noticed that too. Yes, these guys have risen from the grave.
The line drawn in the sand in what was it, August 2015 or something. But up until that time, the significant way of talking about where things were was more in terms of cities and their hinterlands, mm-hmm. and what went on between the cities and their hinterlands that was tribal. Mm-hmm. And most of the Shia, if not all of the Shia activity, was urban, and all of the non-urban activity was Sunni.
Okay.
Now, there were certainly Sunni cities as well, but the significance of this is the fact that I think the Shia, insofar as they're in cities, are not paying much attention to what goes on outside the cities.
So when a Westerner looks at a map of ISIS-controlled territory, smack dab in the middle of Baghdad and Tehran almost, one has to look at it through the eyes of the historical eyes of people on the ground, and the view is, well, all right, we're safe in our urban enclaves, and it's not necessarily bothering us. It's something that's not desirable, but we're certainly not.
It's true that also it needs to be mentioned that the people outside the cities used to have a habit of raiding the cities in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But that, of course, hasn't been happening for a long time now. Mm-hmm. Because of the new nation-state type of organization. But the division between Sunni and Shia is also taking on a almost an ethnic dimension as well. So that for example, the Kurds are all Sunni. Or at least there are a few Shia Kurds, but we never hear anything about them. The Iranians are 85% probably Shi'i, but not 100%. Saudi Arabia is a Sunni monarchy, but has a larger minority of Shi'i than Iran has of Sunni.
Mm-hmm. Many of them guest workers.
Well, no,
Oh, no?
native
the native
in the
population
east
here.
of the country.
Okay.
Because Saudi Arabia is such a young state, and so Arabia, the peninsula, was not. I mean, it's not unified now because it obviously has several other states around the coast, from Oman, which is large, to the Emirates on the Gulf, which are quite small. But the greater part of it has been unified just since 1935,
Right.
and before that, Iran and Shi'i communities were much freer to develop in different parts of the peninsula that were closer to the Gulf.
So
And of course, the Gulf Emirates, in their current form, were produced largely by the British.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And that's also added to the problem. So it's not just Sykes-Picot. There's a lot of other things going on as well.
So there's a little bit of a misperception then in the West when maps are reviewed of current day Shia, or I should say Islamic State penetration, wondering, well, why should we do anything if the Shia on the ground are not necessarily doing anything? So
well, another thing is, people are still criticizing Obama for not doing anything about Syria.
Mm.
But it seems as though we still have this habit of thinking that it's up to us to organize the world.
Yes.
But I think that most of the problems in the Middle East are problems of us trying to organize the world.
I would agree with that.
And we've got to somehow work out a way to make it possible for them to organize themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure how that is going to be done now, but the first thing I think is to stop organizing it for them.
Yes.
And talk. I think there should be more talking.
What did you think? Did you have time to read Obama's commencement address at Rutgers?
No. Was there anything interesting in that?
Well, you'll find it very interesting. It's almost a synopsis of your globalization course about the need to break down barriers and engage even more and not be afraid of cross-cultural and cross-ethnic contacts. And it really was. It was quite interesting to read, given what's going on in the political environment both here and in the United Kingdom.
No, the most important thing now is to somehow even out the rates of social change in different parts of the world. But it's very difficult. I think the only way we can do that is to try to break down the barriers that inhibit change. Mm-hmm. And that in the Middle East, that's particularly difficult because the Arab Spring was in fact a rebellion against Western patronage of undemocratic leaders, though it's not recognized in that way by many people.
No, not hardly.
But there's still a lot of undemocratic leaders there that are benefiting from Western support. That need to be eased out, and the King of Saudi Arabia is one of them, actually, but also the leaders of each of the Gulf states.
Yes.
And Iran is not one of them.
No, Iran is actually the most freely elected government in the region.
Yeah.
So
well, it's looking at it like this, it's difficult to be optimistic about the immediate future. One needs to have a much longer term view, I think.
Well, we do have that, and we'll take a snapshot view of it next week.
Okay.
All right, Professor. Thank you very much.
Bye.